So picture this for a second. It's 2035 and you're scrolling through your phone looking for vacation ideas. You see an ad that says, Summit Everest in 48 hours, no experience required. You click on it, and there it is. A sleek gondola system that takes you straight up the mountain. At the top, there's a heated observation deck, maybe even a McDonald's where you can grab a Big Mac at 29,000 feet. You take your summit selfie, post it on Instagram, and ride back down in time for dinner. Sounds insane, right? Like something out of a weird dystopian movie. But here's the thing, we're not as far from that reality as you might think. Because Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world, this ultimate symbol of human endurance and adventure, is changing. And it's changing fast. What used to be this incredibly dangerous, elite challenge that only the most experienced climbers could even attempt is now becoming, well, something else. Something more accessible. Something more commercial. These days, if you've got about $60,000 to $90,000 and a few months to spare, you can basically sign up to climb Everest. You don't need to be an elite mountaineer. You don't even need that much experience. You just need the money and a guide company willing to take you up there. So today we're talking about the future of Everest, not the Everest you see in those old documentaries with legendary climbers battling the elements. No, we're talking about Everest 2.0, where gondolas and fast food at the summit might not be that crazy after all. And the real question is, how far can we push this before Everest stops being Everest? Let's dive in. Alright, so first, let's talk about how we got here. Everest has always been dangerous, like really dangerous. In the early days, only the most experienced climbers even attempted it. We're talking about people who trained for years, who knew the mountains inside and out. And even then, a lot of them didn't make it back. But then in the 1990s and 2000s, something shifted. Guide companies started popping up, offering what they called fully supported expeditions. Basically, they'd handle everything. The permits, the Sherpas, the oxygen, the gear, the route. All you had to do was show up, follow instructions, and try not to die. And suddenly, Everest became accessible. Now, I'm not saying it became easy. It's still Everest. People still die up there every year. But the barrier to entry dropped dramatically. You didn't need to be a mountaineering expert anymore. You just needed to be in decent shape and willing to pay. And people did pay. Thousands of them. Because if you think about it, climbing Everest is the ultimate bucket list item, right? It's bragging rights for life. So more and more people started signing up, and the mountain got crowded. Like, really crowded. There's this famous photo from 2019, maybe you've seen it, where there's literally a line of hundreds of climbers waiting to reach the summit. It looks like a queue at Disneyland, except you're at 29,000 feet and people are dying in that line because they're stuck there too long. That's the reality now. That's what Everest has become. So let's talk about what happens when you put that many people on a mountain that was never designed to handle crowds. First off, the environment takes a beating. Everest is covered in trash now. We're talking empty oxygen bottles, old tents, food wrappers, even human waste. It's gotten so bad that there are now cleanup expeditions whose entire job is to haul garbage down the mountain. They've pulled out literal tons of trash, tons, from a mountain. And then there's the human cost. When you've got hundreds of people trying to summit on the same day, everything slows down. You get bottlenecks, especially near the top where the route is narrow. And up there, time is everything. The longer you're in the death zone, and that's above 26,000 feet where there's not enough oxygen to sustain human life, the more your body shuts down. Your brain stops working right. Your limbs go numb. Eventually, you just stop. So when people get stuck in those lines waiting for their turn to stand on the summit for a photo, they're literally dying. In 2019 alone, 11 people died on Everest, and a lot of those deaths were linked to overcrowding. People ran out of oxygen waiting in line, others got too exhausted and couldn't make it back down. It's wild when you think about it. You pay all that money, you train for months, you risk your life, and then you die because there were too many people in front of you. That's not adventure. That's just terrible, like really terrible. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because some people think the solution isn't to limit access. It's to make Everest even more accessible. Now bear with me here because this sounds crazy, but it's real. There have been proposals, actual proposals, to build infrastructure on Everest to make it easier and safer for tourists. We're talking about things like gondolas, cable cars, even permanent shelters at higher altitudes. Imagine this. Instead of spending weeks acclimatizing at base camp, you just hop in a gondola that takes you up to, say, 20,000 feet. You get out, take some photos, maybe push a little higher with your guide, and then ride back down. Suddenly, Everest becomes something you can do in a long weekend. Now, this hasn't happened yet, but it's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Nepal and China, the two countries that share Everest, Both have a lot to gain financially from tourism, and if making Everest easier to climb means more tourists and more money, well, you can see where the incentive is. And this isn't just hypothetical. Look at what's already happened on other mountains. In the Alps, for example, there are cable cars that take you right up to the peaks. Mont Blanc, one of the most famous mountains in Europe, has become so crowded that they've had to implement quotas. It's the same pattern. Make it accessible, tourists flood in, and the mountain changes forever. So the question is, could that happen to Everest? Alright, so let's push this to the extreme for a second. Let's imagine what Everest could look like if commercialization keeps going unchecked. Picture this, it's 2035. You book a trip to Everest through a travel app, just like you'd book a trip to Paris. You fly into Kathmandu, take a helicopter to base camp, which is now basically a small city with heated lodges, Wi-Fi, and gift shops. You spend a night there, maybe grab a latte, post some photos on Instagram. The next morning you board a gondola. It's got big windows, comfortable seats, and it takes you straight up to 26,000 feet in about 2 hours. You step out onto a viewing platform, and there it is, the summit of Everest, just a short guided climb away. There are ropes, ladders, and safety rails the whole way up. Oxygen is included in your ticket price. At the summit there's a small building, inside there's a McDonald's, maybe a Starbucks. You grab a burger, take a selfie with the "Welcome to the Summit" sign, and then head back down on the gondola. Sounds ridiculous, right? Like something out of a satirical movie. But if you think about it, we're not that far off. The infrastructure is already there. The guide companies, the fixed ropes, the oxygen systems. All it would take is a little more investment, a little more willingness to prioritize profit over preservation, and boom, Everest becomes Everest land. And here's the thing, some people would love that. For a lot of folks, the idea of standing on top of the world without the risk of dying sounds pretty appealing. But in the process, Everest loses what made it special in the first place. It stops being a challenge. It stops being about adventure and becomes just another tourist spot. Now, let's talk about what we lose if this happens. First, there's the environmental impact. Everest is part of a fragile ecosystem. The glaciers up there are already melting because of climate change, and adding more infrastructure, more people, more waste, more energy consumption only makes it worse. The mountain can't sustain this level of activity. Eventually, something's got to give. And then there's the cultural cost. For the Sherpa people who live in the region and have guided climbers for generations, Everest is sacred. It's called Sagarmatha in Nepali and Chomolungma in Tibetan, and it's considered the mother goddess of the world. Turning it into a commercial playground isn't just disrespectful, it's a violation of something deeply important to their culture. The Sherpas have always been the backbone of Everest expeditions. They're the ones who set up the camps, carry the gear, fix the ropes, and in many cases save lives. But they're also the ones who take the most risk. Sherpas die on Everest at a much higher rate than Western climbers, and they often do it for a fraction of the pay. So when we talk about making Everest more accessible, we have to ask, accessible for who? And at what cost? Because right now, the people who benefit most from commercialization aren't the ones who live there. It's the guide companies, the tourism boards, and the wealthy climbers who can afford to buy their way to the top. So, is there a way to balance things? Can we keep Everest accessible without destroying it? Some people think the answer is stricter regulations. Limit the number of permits each year. Require climbers to prove they have real experience before they're allowed on the mountain. Enforce cleanup rules and hold companies accountable for the waste they leave behind. And honestly, that makes sense. If fewer people were on the mountain at any given time, there'd be less crowding, less trash, and probably fewer deaths. The mountain would still be there for those who are willing to put in the work to earn the summit. But here's the problem. Enforcing those rules requires political will, and right now there's a lot of money on the line. Nepal, in particular, relies heavily on tourism revenue from Everest. For a small developing country, those permits, which cost about $11,000 each, add up fast. Cutting the number of climbers means cutting income, and that's a tough sell. So in the end, it comes down to a choice. Do we prioritize preservation and respect for the mountain, or do we keep pushing toward accessibility and profit? Here's the thing about Everest. It's not just a mountain, it's a symbol. It represents something bigger. The idea that there are still places on Earth that are wild, untamed, and dangerous. Places where you can't just buy your way to the top, where you have to earn it. But that version of Everest is disappearing, and maybe in some ways that's inevitable. The world changes, tourism grows, technology makes things easier. But if we're not careful, we're going to lose what made Everest special in the first place. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what do we want Everest to be? Do we want it to stay a challenge, a test of human endurance and respect for nature? Or are we okay with it becoming just another destination, a place where anyone with enough money can check off their bucket list? Because eventually, we're going to have to decide, and whatever we choose, there's no going back. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you climb Everest if it was easy, or does that defeat the whole point? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.